Okay, those staying in here, please come up towards the front because we want to get together and study. So come into the middle if you can, and we're going to have a highly interactive Sabbath school today. You need to be on your toes, have your Bibles open as we're studying Daniel chapter 6 today. And maybe someone could bring me the lapel mic so I can use that. I can move around a little more freely. Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6 today. And Daniel 6 is just a key chapter. It's not busy work. Now, on the front of your quarterlies, you have a picture, and that picture is of what? Of the lions, and that picture is actually from the Pergamon Museum in Babylon. Berlin. Berlin's kind of like Babylon, depending on what time you're there, and it was transported there. I don't remember when exactly. I used to probably know that, but I had 120 lions on this gateway that went into Babylon. Hey, those over on the side here, if you want to come to the middle, that'd be great. Let's all get together so we all sink together on the same ship. We go there every year on a Reformation tour, and it's very impressive. I mean, the lions were meant to let people know that the king of Babylon was like a lion, and that the enemies of Babylon would be done in by the lions. So this definitely is a story that focuses on one of the main features of Babylon in terms of its symbolism. They found many gold pieces of jewelry that were all lions. They had lion earrings, they had lion necklaces, they had lion bracelets, and lions were lion all around. So all kinds of lions. Now I need someone to help me with a microphone because we're going to read together some of these verses. Who's going to help me? You going to help? All right. So let's look in Daniel chapter 6, and we're in Daniel, and I'm going to have someone read for us some of the first verses here. Who would like to read? I'm going to have you read verse 1 through, let's just do 1 through 4, I believe it is. Who's going to read for us?
I'll read.
Okay,
1
go
through
ahead.
4. Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him.
Okay, so what's the setting here? What's going on? Who's gathered together? Who's coming together? 120 what? Satraps. Okay, so satraps. This is not like sand traps. This is not golf. And why are they coming together? Why are they coming together? Thank you for these answers. Why are they coming together? Why are they coming together? So they're all coming together, the heads of these various satraps, kind of looks like a bunch of cells here. And they had 120 of these jurisdictions, and they were coming together. They were concerned about somebody. Who were they concerned about? Daniel. Now, why were they concerned about Daniel? Why were they concerned about Daniel? Why were they concerned about Daniel? Let me rephrase that. Why do you think they were concerned about Daniel? Go ahead and hold the mic up there so we can hear you.
Working. Oh, it's working. Because he was one of the captives, and because he was better than they?
All right, listen to this. She is actually calling him one of the captives. This is what the unsanctified Babylonians would say, one of the captives. How old is Daniel now, Pilar?
70-something.
He's 80 years old, according to your lesson at least. He's in his 80s. He's actually ruled through different phases in top leadership in Babylon. He probably was the guy in Daniel chapter 4 that was out there saying, here, king, 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 trying to get your omega-3s. He was out there taking care of the king, probably in the grasslands. He was the person in charge. He had been there since what age? 15. He was 15 years old. 18 years old, he graduated from Babylon University, with high honors. He was very intellectually superior. He was physically superior, and he was politically superior as well. What is this setting in Daniel chapter 6? What has just happened in Daniel chapter 5 in October 12, 539? What just happened? On the Day of Atonement, Babylon had fallen because it was trying to, take God's place, and Belshazzar had fallen. Everyone had fallen. I mean, they had marched into the city, and Daniel had been dressed up like a leader, yet he was protected. And now, what does it say about him? He had a what? Verse 3. He distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because of what? Yeah, and why did the king like him? And did it say there in verse 2? Why did the king like him? Specifically in verse 2. Why did the king like him? Look with your own little meaty eyeballs there at 2, verse 2. Excellent spirit's one thing, but that was verse 3. What's in verse 2? The king would suffer no what? Damage. No loss. And that, or damage, it says in some translations, that actually means revenue. So Daniel was actually like in charge of the finances, and the king would suffer no loss. And so the other people were used to getting a little something, something on the side, right? And now you have an accountant that comes in, and he says, no, we are not going to suffer anybody to take a little bit of extra of the money. Now, I had a friend once from Thailand. He was a Buddhist monk. And he was a very faithful accountant in Thailand, and so the mafia came after him because he would always figure out what they were doing. They were going to kill him. And so he came over to Kansas, where I lived, and he was an engineer as well. So he became an engineer. He's working at Boeing. And I started to learn about him because one of my other members was an engineer, and he started giving studies to him about Christianity. And so then, it brought me in. This guy was totally honest. So guess what he became? Became a Seventh-day Adventist. He loved this story, the story of Daniel 6. He loved the stories about Jesus in the New Testament. So he suffered no loss. So what did they do? Verse 4 and 5. We read verse 4. Someone else read verse 5 for us with a nice clarion calling voice. Someone in the back, someone right next to you. Just hand the microphone to somebody. They should all be ready to read at this point. Yes.
Verse 5, Then these men said, We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God.
Okay, so Dr. Harris, what was the thing that was going to trip Daniel up, they thought?
That he would obey his God.
Okay, so they knew if it came down to a showdown, who was he going to follow? He's going to follow God's law and not his own will, his own dictates. I just was at a funeral yesterday for Dr. Robert Gentry, who wrote the book Creation's Tiny Mystery. Small polonium halos found in the granites that encircle the earth, right? And as I was reading through his testimony, he was a scientist, a top scientist, physics, a brilliant physicist, and was asked to do his PhD. And then he said, I want to use my PhD to show that the earth is young based on polonium halos. And they hated him because of that. He didn't get any more grant money, anything else. But as I was reading his testimony, I was very impressed that the thing that led him to look at evolution was that he had been an evolutionist all his life, but he became a Seventh-day Adventist, and they looked at the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, right? The Lord made heaven and earth on this in 6 days and rested the seventh day. And he goes, if that's true, then what I'm hearing cannot be true, and I want to prove that it's not true based on physics, based on polonium halos. And guess what happened? He proved it, but he got blackballed by all the science. There was nobody there that should have been there at his funeral yesterday, in my estimation. This is one of the great scientists. And Daniel was like that. He would stand for the truth regardless. Okay, so what does he do? What do they do because of this? Someone read for us. Who's reading next? Maybe right over here. Hand it to one of the Krugers. They need to read. They're back from the Holy Lands. They know what's happening. They always bring their Bibles. They're right on top of it. So give them verse 6 through 9.
So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom and the advisors, administrators, and the satraps, the counselors and the advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree.
Okay, so some questions for the Krugers. Some questions here. What was set up here? What did they set up? What kind of showdown was set up here?
Well, they're the satraps. They set up a trap.
Yeah, the satrap set up a trap. Good. We didn't practice this. So, what was the trap they set up?
They knew the outcome. They just had him framed. They knew what he was going to do, and so they laid a trap for him.
Specifically, what was the trap? We're not talking about the outcome.
Oh, not to pray to any other god except the
Okay,
king.
so 30 Fito?
30 days.
30. Fito got me this marker. Where is Fito? Fito? Get me a marker that works. All right. Run quickly, andale arriba. So 30 holidays, 30 holy, we could say holy days. And who was supposed to be holy during these days? Who was supposed to be worshipped?
Only worship the king.
Only the king. But what was the problem with this for Daniel?
Wrong king.
He had a different king.
Right. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquities of the fathers upon the children of the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy on the thousands that love me and keep my commandments, right? So you have, this is what Kurt was going to say. You have man's law, right? Isn't that what you're going to say? Versus
Absolutely.
what? Versus God's law. Where's Fito? Oh, hey, Fito. Fito. So, man's law versus God's law. Now, how many? Oh, thank you for, some people have veto power, but you have Fito power. So, God's law versus man's law. Let me ask you a question. Is this relevant today?
Absolutely.
Is it true that every single day you get put in a situation where you have to choose on the basis of God's law versus man's law? Anybody have something like this happen this week? God's law versus man's law. All right. I don't know if the batteries are not working, the PA's not working. All right. Okay. See what Daniel's doing? He's toying with me. He says, I can turn you on, I can shut you off, or I can turn you on. It's kind of like my mother says to me, I brought you into the world and I can take you out of this world. Okay, and this is what they were saying as well. They were saying to Daniel, look, we don't like the fact that you're taking our revenue stream, that your integrity is getting in the way of our forward progression financially. So they want to come up with The holidays, 30 holidays in a row. Now, how many of you think that holidays, just in and of themselves, are kind of dangerous? You know when most people die in America? During the holidays. You know what the number one day of death is? It's Christmas Day. You know what number 2 is? You guys are really cynical. Thanksgiving. Thank you, guys. No, it's not Thanksgiving. They really went for the jugular there, didn't they? It's actually New Year's Day. People get depressed because they have to pay all that stuff they spent, you know. And the other thing is they don't take their medications. They don't do what they're supposed to do. They don't exercise. They eat high-fat, I know that you guys don't, high-fat, sugar-laden meals, and diabetics, and everything gets out of kilter, and there's just all kinds of death around that time. So holidays are very dangerous. And how many are we going to have in a row? 30 holidays. That's enough to do anybody in, even just physically speaking. Now notice, did you notice something? First of all, they came with what did they come to present their case, first of all? How did they present their case, first of all? They got together, and they flattered the king, and it says they thronged the king. What does that mean? How many of you have ever been thronged? I remember when Dr. Gentry, thinking of him today because his funeral was yesterday, I had him in Kansas, and he was talking about creation, and there were all these people loved his book, and they loved everything, and they thronged him. They just came all around him. They said, "Sign our book and autograph this and that," and they came, and all these people came to the king and thronged him. And did they tell the truth? Huh? Okay, if someone kind of tells the truth, is that the truth? No, it's not the truth. If we need to work, how many think we need to work with Pilar? Says that the king is old and an immigrant captive, and now she says truth is partially true. Okay, send one of the deaconesses over there next to her, sit next to her. What were you going to say? So go ahead. What?
Is there truth?
Oh, no. She goes, "Is there truth?" This, by the way, is what Pilate said, and he's not looked at favorably in the Bible, Pilar. Fito, take control here. Move close to your wife. Work with her. Okay. So, boy, she really got us off. Okay, so we have this setup, and what we're getting at is they came, first of all, with peer pressure. They kind of told a lie because they said, we're the wise men, but Daniel was not with them. So the wisest of all of them, the most excellent, the smartest guy in the room, the sharpest knife in the batch, he's not there. And they're presenting this, maybe with a huge crowd, so the king won't notice that Daniel the octogenarian is not there. Right? And the king, they says, establish it. They do it fast, don't they? They want this legislation passed rapidly. Have you ever watched politicians that want to do something rapidly? They kind of don't follow the rules, you know, because they want it rapidly to put something in writing. Have you ever watched this? I don't know. I've seen this in various countries. And they kind of put the hurry up. And then they said, put it in what? Because that was supposed to be what? A firmer decree, and it couldn't be changed. How many of you ever get nervous when somebody comes to your meeting and starts writing down everything you said? What are they trying to do? Or maybe they have their camera out there taking a picture of you while you're talking. What are they trying to do? Hold you to it, right? And they're trying to hold this king to it because they know that when he figures it out, he's not going to be happy, right? So they put him in a box. So now notice this. It's God's law versus man's law. And this is, of course, the showdown right at the very end of time as well, right? Revelation 13. There's going to be God's law versus man's law. Revelation 13. How many of you remember Revelation 13? What are the laws that are in play in Revelation 13? There's two beasts in Revelation 13, one beast and a second beast, and verse 11 through 17 puts four elements. What are the four elements in Revelation 13, verse 11 through 17? What are the elements that are there? They said worship. Revelation 13, all the world has to worship the first beast who was wounded, whose deadly wound was healed. So what commandment is that breaking? Thou shalt not have any other Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them or worship them, right? That's commandment 1. Number 2, they were supposed to do what in Revelation chapter 11? Make an image to the beast. Was wounded and now lives. What commandment is that? Thou shalt not make unto thee any grave and image or any likeness of anything in heaven above, or earth beneath, right? Then, what's the next thing they say? You need to have what? You have to have the name or number of that beast. What's the third commandment? Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who taketh his name in vain. Then what happens next? What's the next thing mentioned in Revelation 13? They can't buy or sell who don't receive the mark. What do you think the next commandment is? Right? And if they get marked, they get put in, they get killed. And Daniel, if he gets marked, what happened? He gets marked in this particular chapter, and what happens to him? He gets put in with the beast. Now, can you see how this chapter is directly related to Revelation 13? Directly related. Okay, so let's look at the strategy he uses. Verse 10. Who's going to read verse 10 for us? Someone on this side. They've been trying to sneak away from us. Someone that's looking down, acting like they don't want to read. Find someone over there. What about George Uriah? Look at him. He's not. You got to wake him up back there. Wake him up. Give him a Bible. He might need a Bible. Oh, he has it. Okay. Read it for us. Verse 10.
She will read.
She will read. Look at that.
And
Okay.
when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house. Now his windows were open in his chamber toward Jerusalem. And he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done aforetime.
Okay, this is this power pack, this verse. So what's he do when he finds that the writing has been signed? Let's make a list. What's he do? First of all, he went home. He went home. So let me ask a question. Where is home? Huh? Thank you for that answer. You guys don't know where your home is? Where is home? Let's just say biblically speaking. Or as you go home, is it always home when you go home? How many of you have ever been at home when it doesn't feel like home? How many of you like the psalm when it says, I was glad when they said, let us go to the house of the Lord, because at home it's not that good? Nobody? I know lots of people that when they're at home, it's not really that great. Now, Matthew chapter 12, verse 46 through 50, what does it say? Jesus was talking one day, his mother and his brothers came, and they tried to interrupt him. And what did Jesus say to them? They said to him, hey, look, your mother and your brothers are outside and your mother. And what did Jesus say? He said, who is my mother? And who are my brothers? And who is my sister? Save those who do the what? The will of my Father. So what is home in a biblical definition? What is home? In a spiritual biblical definition, it's a place where people are all together doing the will of God. And what's it say in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 6? Servants do the will of God from the heart. So they're doing the will of God from what? From the heart. So Daniel went home. Now, of course, he went to his physical home, but I just think we need to think about it. How many think it's a good thing to get together to study with people that are family members of the family of God, sons and daughters of God? And they're motivated by what? They're motivated by what? God's law, not man's law. Because this is the will of God. I delight to do thy will. Psalm 40, verse 8. Thy law is written in my heart, right? Said David. Okay, let's keep going. What else does it say in that verse? He went home. What's it say next? He went to his what? Upper room. Which means how many rooms did he have at least? Had at least 2 rooms, right? A lower room and an upper room. Why do you suppose he chose the upper room? What does that tell you about him? What's that? Okay, he's thinking of higher. Anything else? He's thinking of something higher. He's not afraid. He's not afraid. He goes to the upper room. He has confidence. He has fear of God, but no fear of the king, right? And the fear of the Lord leads to life, and he who has it will abide in satisfaction. He will not be visited with evil. Proverbs 19:23, right? So he goes to the upper room. What next in that little verse? What's it say next? He went to his upper room. What's it say next? With his what? Windows open. What do you make out of that? Okay, he's got confidence again, and he's also like God's big screen TV, 3D, HD, right? His windows are open. By the way, was this customary for him? Like he didn't do that to be seen. Some people like to pray, go to prayer meetings to be seen. Right? Sometimes they have an agenda other than prayer. Right? You always can tell who has an agenda other than prayer if their prayer does not lead to activity. If they just go to the prayer meeting, but they're not in the community, red flag. Red flag. Because, and if they do it out of the ordinary, you know, this was ordinary, this was customary for Daniel. 3 times a day. So he goes to the same place, his windows are open. What do you have next? Next after that. His windows open, what's it say next? Toward what? Now, why did he do that? Why were his windows open towards Jerusalem? Someone read for me 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 38. Who's going to read that rapidly? It's Bible sword. How many remember that? Where we had the Bible sword game when you were growing up? Put your Bible up, and then they read the text. And who got there first? One. Okay, let's read it. All right, 1 Kings 8:38. Who's got it? Who has it? Okay. Wait, Kirk, he won again. But he already read once. So, yeah, you can read. Go ahead, please.
1 Kings 8:38 says, "What prayer and supplication soever be made by any man, or by all thy people Israel, which shall know every man the plague of his own hands, and spread forth his hands toward his house."
Okay, so whenever you're taken captive, wherever you're in any land, you should pray towards what house? Pray towards Jerusalem. So the whole idea is that when they were taken captive, and also in the prayer of Solomon, he says, if you are taken captive to any land, pray towards Jerusalem, pray towards this house. So what do you suppose? Where was that window facing? It was facing towards Jerusalem. What was he saying? What was he trying to say with that? I might be captive here, but what? But what? But God has a house, he has a temple, it's going to be repaired, and my worship is still focused on the person and place of God. Right? And this was what he did every single day. Now look, you can tell a lot about someone's prayer life by what they're focusing on. If you go with us on the Reformation tour, we take you to the Colosseum. And the Colosseum, right next to the Colosseum, there's an arch. How many of you know what arch is right next to the Colosseum? What? What's that's Titus Arch. That's what I'm talking about. One right next to the Colosseum. You need to go with us on the tour. How many think Fito needs to go? Okay, we're going to take up an offering to take Fito, and we're going to get some counseling for his wife at the same time. So, no, we don't. Okay, so there's an arch there. What arch is right there in front of the Colosseum? Anybody know? Huh? I can't hear you. Constantine's. That's correct. Constantine's arch. What was Constantine's arch focused on? It's tilted just a little bit towards the Colosseum. What was in front of the Colosseum? A big statue of Nero. But after he was torn down, it was a big statue of the sun god. So when you look through Constantine's arch towards the Colosseum, guess what you see? You see the sun god. The venerable day of the sun. Constantine led the church to start worshiping on instead of the Sabbath, right? And his whole arch was focused on the worship of the sun. Does it matter where you're focusing when you pray? And what was Daniel focusing on? Jerusalem. Now, what's in Jerusalem there? You've got the sanctuary. What's in the sanctuary? You have the altar. You have the laver. You have the lampstands. You have the table of showbread. And then you have what? The law of God and that pot of manna and Aaron's rod that budded. And so here he is. He's focusing on this plan of what? The plan of what? Salvation. He realizes his salvation comes from who? The Lamb. And by the way, has he always focused on this? How did he focus on this in chapter 1? He didn't want to eat the king's meat. Unclean meat was outside the temple. Clean meat was here. And then you had grains and grapes and olive oil here. And then you had fruits, nuts, grains, vegetables here. And he was focusing, every single time, he was focusing on the most holy place. And how was prayer focused on the most holy place? If you're looking at the sanctuary. When you're praying 3 times a day, that's almost all the time, right? How is that focusing on the sanctuary? It's focusing on the altar of what? Where was the altar of incense? Was it in the holy place or the most holy place? The answer is both. In some places, the Bible, it's pictured as in the holy place, and in some places it's pictured in the most holy place. Because what does it do? Where does the smoke go? It goes from the holy place into the most holy place. And when he's praying towards Jerusalem, he's focusing again on the what? The most holy place interceder. And who is that? Whoever lives to make intercession for us according to Hebrews 7:25. Jesus. And he's focusing on that high priest, and his prayers are joining with those prayers. How many think this is a great strategy when you come up man's law versus God's law? Right? So let's keep going on. But let's keep going. What's next in that verse? He knelt towards Jerusalem, with his windows towards Jerusalem, and he knelt on his, what's it say? He knelt on his knees. What's that teaching? He knelt on his knees. Why does it bring this out? Even though he goes up, even though he has his windows open, make no mistake, he's what? He's under what? He's under authority. His standing is under God. He has understanding. Is it important how you pray? Is it probably good to bow down once in a while and flat on your face? You see this throughout the scriptures, right? And what if you're in a situation where you're going to be killed if you don't bow down to the right person? They say, you need to pray to the king, and so he does. He prays to the King of Kings. Yes.
Would it also be accurate to say that when that death decree or that law came out, that Daniel opened his windows and he prayed towards Jerusalem, that he was also praying to the God of peace, the city of peace, because here he is faced with a lot of stress, but he prayed to the God of peace, Salem.
Well, they're going to see that study and contrast later on. A very good point from one of our theology students here at Weimar College. How many can say amen? Excellent point. And the God of peace fills you with peace. What's it say? Psalm 119, 165. Great peace have they which love thy law, nothing shall offend them. He's at complete peace, and the king is about to go to pieces, right? So, very good point. Yes?
He could have prayed with the window shut and still was praying. He could have stood in front of the window instead of knelt, and then you wouldn't know whether he was praying or he wasn't praying, but he would be praying. Mm-hmm. So there's some alternatives he had that he chose not to do.
This is true. And the pen of inspiration actually backs you up on this and says that he actually did this specifically so that the people would know that he was following his normal routine. It was a showdown, not about him. It wasn't about him. It was about God versus their gods. That was the showdown between those two. Back here in the back.
I think one thing beautiful about the altar of incense is that it's our prayers that God considers to be his air freshener. I mean, you know, it's great to have air freshener when things smell bad. And
I like that.
but our prayers are beautiful to God, and they move God's heart. And the fact that God loves us like that, I see that picture in the sanctuary, and it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yes. And remember how those prayers get there. It's confession of sin. It's the water of the washing of the word. It's wanting to be a light of the world and share the bread with others. And it's that heart that leads to that place, you might say. So that's why in prayer we do what the next thing is that he says here. What's it say next in the verse? He knelt 3 times a day and prayed. So, you know, the psalmist says 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. How many think it's important to have evening worship? How about midday worship? How about morning worship? I mean, you think of the Shema. What's the Shema say? You know, you talk about it when you rise up and when you lie down and when you're in a house. So there's never a time. You know, every mealtime might be a good time to read something else that can keep your eyes focused all throughout the day. Okay, what's the next thing? He prayed, and what's it say next? Gave what? Gave thanks. Why is that important? Is that important? By the way, it's God's law versus man's law. He's in the midst of this great controversy, and he prays, and it says specifically gave thanks. What is the power of giving thanks? Someone help me out. Is there any ideas you have about this element? How many of you have ever given thanks? Why did you do that? I'm trying to get you to respond here if you didn't notice. All right, wait, there's someone back here. What? Yes.
When we give thanks, we vindicate God's name.
Okay, explain
in our
that to
lives.
us.
Yeah. But, well, we are here so that, like Job, God saw that he could vindicate his name through his life. So by giving thanks and believing that God is in control and making every little detail of your life for your good, you're actually vindicating his name before the universe.
Okay, that's a very good thought. Have you thought of that before? When you give thanks, you're actually vindicating God's name, and you're giving him glory. Because you fear God, you give him glory. The hour of his judgment here is coming, and you're vindicating by giving thanks. Any other ideas on thanksgiving? Okay, right over here. Thanksgiving, right in the middle. Sal is running as fast as Sal can go.
Another thing about thanks is that it changes you. When you look back and see how God has led in the past, it increases your faith in knowing that God will continue to lead in the future.
Okay, so Thanksgiving. You're saying Thanksgiving looks to the past. How many would agree that it's good to have Thanksgiving that looks to the past? But how many of you have ever tried Thanksgiving that looks to the future? I'm going to give you an examples. Can you give me an examples of the Bible of Thanksgiving that look to the future? Jesus prays for Lazarus and says, I thank you that you're going to raise him from the dead. What about the feeding of the 5,000? I thank you for this food that's going to be produced. So Thanksgiving is not just looking at the past, although that's good. It can also be a strategy for looking at the future. Very powerful. Okay, let's finish that verse 10 up. What's it say next? Give thanks before his God. What's it say next? As his custom was since early days. So what's it saying? Was anything here new? None of it was new. None of it was new. That's a big point. How many think that's a big point? The scribes and the Pharisees prayed to be seen of men. They only did it when it was connected to some kind of agenda they had. It wasn't who they really were. Yeah? but this was his custom from early days. How old is he now? Pilar? 80. All right, let's go on. Let's go on in our story. This is a fascinating story. By the way, this law of the king was written with what? Was written with what? The law of the king was written with what? Okay. Okay. The king's hand, right? And was it changeable? He says it's not changeable, but was it changeable? It's changeable because it only lasts for how long? Which means it's going to change. So it had built-in change. It was written at the king's hand. It was changeable. And it was signed. And later on, what does the king do with his law? He puts his seal as a part of it. What about God's law? Who writes God's law? God writes it. Is it changeable? Doesn't change. Doesn't change. Does it have a seal? It has a seal. Kind of interesting, this showdown here. And let's see how it plays out in the story. Let's look. Okay, who's going to read for me? We're reading now verse 11 through 17. Who's reading? 11 through 17. Okay, Esther.
Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, That Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petitions 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed.
Okay, let's talk about this. What's happening here? What really jumps out at you as important? There's a number of very important things here. What do you think is very important in this story as you reread it, hopefully with new eyes? Anything important about this section? Okay, get a microphone. If you have something, just raise your hand. They'll bring you a microphone, so this will be eternally on record. Go ahead.
The king knew immediately that he had been trapped.
Okay, so the king had been snookered. He had been trapped. He had been taken. How many think that that's fairly evident from the text? And what does it mean he was trapped? You notice they said to him, Know, O king, know that this is the law of the Medes and Persians. What's that mean? You better know something. If you change this, you politically are done. We're all the power. We're from all the satraps. And we're going to make it very politically hard on you. So the rulership of the kingdom was somewhat shared in this situation, it seems, as well. So yeah, that's very interesting. Anyone else? Anything else important here in these verses? Yes, Pilar. Now, Pilar, let me say a couple things you do not want to say because you don't want to sound like these folks. Verse 13, Daniel, who's one of the captives of Judah. All right, but something else, right?
Yes, it's something
Okay,
else.
go ahead.
I think the king was actually acknowledging God when he says, you know, your God is going to deliver you. So this is a big example for the rest of the people.
Listen to this. Is this a good point that Pilar is making? How many would agree? Let's take a vote. How many think not a very good point, Pilar? Okay, Pilar, you're carrying, they thronged you. So he's actually recognizing your God who you serve continually. Why does he say that?
You know, ever since we started reading the book of Daniel, we know that Daniel was faithful to the God. And by this time, I guess Darius already knew the whole story.
So they know that this guy is faithful. He's faithful with finances. He's faithful with food. He's faithful with the faith. And he does it continually. And go ahead.
I just noticed, too, that the satraps of Daniel's day used their power, their collective power to put the king in a box. We have satraps today. And the satraps today, you mentioned one scientist on evolution versus creationism. They use their collective force today. We have satraps who gay rights. And they use their force. Don't let any government, don't let anybody stand in our way or we'll destroy you.
Okay,
They
so
use
this is
that
very
same
interesting.
principle.
Church, state, power, that kind of is saying it's churchy. This would be kind of Pilar's kind of truth statement. Sort of true, right? Oh, I didn't let you finish. Okay, their truth. Okay, so there's a church-state power here that we have today is what you're saying, right? But over and against that, what is it saying about Daniel? Your God who you do what? You serve continually. Think about this. They found no fault in Daniel. He serves God continual service. And also the other word continual would be continual prayer, right? We see that. Not just prayer, but he's also very practically involved in the finances of the kingdom. He's not just sitting at home praying. He's actually involved, very involved, yes? And this is a type of the what at the end of time? The what? The 144 what? Thousand, right? At the end of time. They have what? No fault, no guile in their mouth. Can you see how powerful this chapter really is? It's a type. And what you pointed out is so important to point out. Okay, back to, what was your name again?
My name is São. São. Yes.
Sal.
Like São Paulo.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think for me it's important to see that this continually, this word, means that with every little decision that we make in our lives, we're actually sealing our destiny. And so he had been used to this. And it doesn't mean that it was easy for him, but he was doing right also because it was right, not going by emotion or feeling, but with every little decision we make, when the Holy Spirit brings to our minds that we are actually sealing our destiny with Jesus or with the other side. And so the remnant will be the same.
Okay.
We will have to have been used to doing and to have this intimate connection with Jesus. If we don't love him, we will go with the peer pressure. We will, when put under pressure, we will fall.
So would it be fair to say you're saying small decisions over time is what the word continual means, and we're going to be known by that.
Every thought, every emotion, every decision.
Well, we wouldn't say every thought, would we? Because we have to bring them into captivity. So we can have bad thoughts, but we have to get in touch with them and overcome them. How many of you have ever had bad thoughts this week? How many of you had bad thoughts today? You're constantly having, in your sin nature, it's always originating those. It's not a sin to have a bad thought. It's a sin to fixate on it and act on it, right? So was it a sin to touch the fruit in the tree of the garden? No, it wasn't a sin. It was a sin to eat it. But the devil said, no, that was a sin. If we draw the lines too close like God does it, what's going to be happening? We're going to become hopeless, compulsive neurotics. Oh, I had a bad thought. No. Let that thought pass. Understand what I'm saying? I mean, I know you didn't mean that. Okay, so let's keep going. This is powerful. Did someone have anything else they wanted to say here about this? Yes.
Just something
Now
short.
you have red on. Is this because of Valentine's Day?
No, I have. I found it interesting that.
Didn't even answer that question.
No.
How many of you guys noticed that she totally didn't answer that question? But she's not the only one just wearing red. You have others here. Okay, go on. Now you look red. Now you're not just wearing red. Okay, go ahead. Read it.
I find it interesting that it talks about King Darius, that he was displeased with himself. Differently than King Nebuchadnezzar, he was displeased with all the magicians and counselors. But in this case, he's displeased with himself, and he sets his heart on Daniel to deliver him. I think it's interesting, kind of that parallel to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel set his heart on, doing what the Lord had said. But he is wanting to intercede for Daniel in this case.
Wow. Ultimately, people that follow man's law instead of God's law are going to be displeased with themselves. And especially if they're taken. This is a very, very interesting point. Have you ever heard that? I've never heard that before. It's a very good point. Thank you for that. So, displeased with himself. And restless. Could he sleep? Could he listen to music? Everything was, he tried all those different things, but it wasn't working for him, right? Very interesting. And the wicked are always really can you ever make a wicked person happy? No, there's always something else they're upset about. So, in this particular case. And notice, sealed with his own signet, and the signets of his lords. Interesting. So, the mark of the beast and those who are marked by the beast, they have the mark and the beast has the mark. Interesting. So you kind of go with the seal of God or the mark of the beast, and everybody shares in that. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 18 through 23. Who's going to read it for us? 18 through 23. Who's ready to read? Who's ready to read? I'm going to have to pick someone. You better be ready, because I might pick you. Right over here, right up here. Someone who has not yet read. Yeah.
Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." Which verse?
That's good.
Okay.
Okay, so what do we see here? What do we see in these verses that we cannot miss? What points need to be made here? We've got God's law versus man's law, and now it's come to the showdown. He's been marked. He's been put in with the beast. You might say he has the mark of the beast on him. He's dead. He's as good as dead. So what lessons can we learn here from these verses we read? Okay, someone said without a microphone, Satan goes about as a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. This lion wasn't going about, that they were thrown to the lions in this particular case. And back then they used to keep lions. The monarchs like to hunt lions. If you ever go to the British Museum, they have a whole room, I think it's called the Lakish Reliefs, where you go in and you see monarchy hunting lions. So they were showing that they had power over the lions. In this particular case, they had lions in a den, maybe to threaten their enemies with, and they were thrown to the lions. Anything else about the king? What about the king did you see in these verses that kind of hit you? Yes, go ahead. Might not even be that.
Well, I thought it was interesting. The king hurried to the lion's den at night, so he had faith that Daniel's God would save him.
So, yeah, he had some idea that maybe God would say. What did he say before he got thrown in? Yeah, he says, look, Daniel, servant of the living God, your God whom you serve continually, I think he's able to deliver you. So it's obvious that he had tried everything he could, right? And he goes, I'm toast. I can't do it. So your God has to deliver you. Remember what Nebuchadnezzar had said before? He said, who is the God who will deliver you? And then 3 worthies were delivered out of the fiery furnace. Remember that? And now you have the same situation. It's different than chapter 3. Chapter 3, they have 3 people together in prison, drawing strength from one another, or in the fiery furnace. Now Daniel's completely alone. The test always gets closer in Daniel. And now there's just one person alone. Anything else? Any other dynamics? I mean, I, of course, always have something to say, but Linda.
He was fasting. No musicians, nothing. He was fasting, and I wonder if he was praying too for him.
So he went on a media fast. He had prayer and fasting. Maybe he said, look, Daniel prayed, I'm going to pray. That's a very interesting point. He's trying his best to help Daniel, since he's kind of locked in by his church-state power struggle that you brought up. Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Dr. Harris.
I thought it interesting that Daniel tells the king, O king, live forever, even after he spent the night in the lion's den.
This is fascinating. Let's come back to that. But look, does Daniel have it out for the king at all? The guy throws him in the lion's den. How many think that you would probably have a bad attitude towards the king if this happened? It's like, you know what, I was the monarch, I fed your grandfather, or at least I had the kingdom, not your kingdom, but I saved you all that money, and you threw me in the lion's den. I mean, if I came out, I might have said something like a little different. How many of you can think of something different you might have said? Those are evil thoughts, right? We're not supposed to have those, but we do. They just pass through right now, right? So he comes out and he says, O king, live forever. So this tells you, what's it tell you about Daniel?
Humble.
He truly loves God and loves the king, even when the king is unloving, right? It's very interesting. Okay, right back over here. Oh, wait, Pilar, did you have something to say?
Well, I think there's a pattern because the king here also is troubled, like in the previous chapters. And then Daniel again testifies of the God, like in previous chapters. So I think all through the book of Daniel, I think one of the lessons that we can see here is that God is always going to answer if we continue to be faithful, even though the circumstances are not in our favor.
God's going to show up, even if the circumstances look bad. Yes?
We know that this story is not just a historical event of the past, it's also an oracle of the future. And of events that will happen to a people very similar in character to what happened in the past. What I just noticed for the first time in this one, reading through, was that for Daniel, there was some sympathetic, in this case, person who was sympathetic toward Daniel but powerless to do anything about it. I wonder if for the people in the end time who have a death decree on them, if there will be people sympathetic toward them but powerless to do anything about it. Just
it's an interesting point, and in fact, it is a point that the Spirit of Prophecy brings out. She actually says that at the end of time, leaders will actually help God's people in some cases, and they'll become believers because of their faithfulness. And I don't know if she's saying if they're powerless or not, but that's a good point. You know, in Hebrews 11, it says the heroes of faith, some of them stopped the mouths of lions, others quenched the violence of fire. That's Daniel 3 and Daniel 6. Escaped the edge of the sword, and out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, and turned the flight of armies and aliens. But there were others who were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings and chains of imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were tempted, they were slain, they went about in sheepskins and goatskins. So some are delivered, some are not. But Daniel and his friends, they said, look, if God delivers us, that's fine. If he doesn't, that's fine too. Because he will ultimately deliver all of us through resurrection, right? So they have that faithfulness, very, very interesting. Now, one last thing before we move to our we've got 5 more minutes, and we have actually 3 bells for, it should have been 5 bells for 5 minutes. But anyway, one last thing. Do you remember another king in the New Testament who got into a dilemma because of a decree that he made? How many of you remember this story? Who was this? Who was this? Not Pilate, that's okay. But
King Herod.
It was King Herod. And what did King Herod, what got King Herod confused? The dancing of
His daughter.
Of Herodias, or the daughter, or Salome's daughter, that dancing, and then he was driven by what? Lust, to make a what? A decree, right? That she would receive anything to the half of his king. How many remember this? And then what happened? Her mother said, do what? Ask for the head of John the Baptist. What did John the Baptist represent? God's law and God's word. And so what happened? John the Baptist was killed. I'm just saying, sometimes we have stories where people are not delivered, but that doesn't mean their story is any less powerful, right? But the king was in a similar situation. The king, in this situation, because of his ego, got sucked into something. How many of you have ever got sucked into a sales pitch because of your ego? I remember I had a church member who bought a car, and he got this car, and his wife told him not to buy it. So he buys the car. He buys the car anyway. And he calls me up, Pastor, I got to talk to you. What happened? So I go to his house. He says, I bought this car. My wife told me not to buy it. I said, so what's the question? You know, you wanting to study on roles and gender things concerning whatever? He goes, no. He goes, I just noticed the car does not fit in the garage. It's too big to go in the garage. So he says, what am I going to do? I said, well, it's obvious. Take the car back. He goes, I can't do that. This is a matter of principle with me. You know what the guy did? He rebuilt the garage. Sometimes we're so intent on our way of doing things that we just won't change. Herod would not change. And this king, I mean, you feel sorry for him. Oh, he got beguiled. He's the king. He was unwilling to stand up for his friend. And he compromised on that. And so it led him into the lion's den. And with Herod, unwilling to stand up. And it was because what had happened? There was that area of life where he was not living in accordance with, but instead was following his own idea. So, all right. One last comment, and then we're going to summarize.
That's very interesting. The law of the Medes and Persians does play out one other story in the Bible, the story of Esther.
Yeah.
And in that story, the law was not changed, but a law was added. And the law was added to protect. So I think in the story of Daniel, I think the king knew he couldn't have said, listen, I make a law that I give Daniel a sword. He probably knew Daniel wouldn't have taken a sword because that might have been a lack of faith. So he did what he could. He knew that he would be protected by his God.
Very good point. Very good point. On a lot of levels, right? So God's law versus man's law. Is it an important story? Is it an important story? Why is it important? Because it directly relates to your life and my life, and also the end time. Is God going to have a people where they can be said of them, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and have the faith of Jesus. Is there going to be people like that? So they have faith, the faith of Jesus, that leads to obedience and commandment keeping in the context of patient endurance under extreme pressure. And this lesson that we have, verse 10, is really the practical steps of how to deal with that. And one last thing. You notice Daniel was called what several times in this chapter? What was he called? Daniel, servant of the what kind of God? Servant. Your God who you serve, servant. So what is a servant? Ephesians 6:6. A servant does the will of God from the heart. Did Daniel believe from the heart? Why did he believe? Why did he believe? Because he saw the God of the sanctuary and he was satisfied with his plan of salvation. Are you satisfied with God? How many of you are satisfied with God and his plan of salvation? And because he was satisfied, he was settled into the truth, and he was a servant for God, and thereby he was sealed for God. Now, my mom's here. When I was a little boy, she used to do a lot of canning, and she would have these jars that would seal. And I don't know if Mom even remembers this, but many times she'd put me in charge of the sealing work. So once the can was all heated up and the seal was affixed, she made me check to see whether or not it was fixed. And what did I listen for, Mom? Yeah. And then she had a little wax pencil, and I would put S on the top. It was sealed. And that's what God's looking for right now. Have you ever thought about it, that the pressures and trials you go through in your life, small as they might be, they're the biggest you have that week, that they're actually testing you to see whether or not you'll follow God's law versus man's law, whether or not you settled it with Jesus, whether you're satisfied with him, and whether you're a servant for him, and that you're sealed for him. How many want to be sealed for the Lord going forth? Daniel chapter 6 lays the foundation now for the next exciting section, which applies all the principles to kingdoms and nations and the end of time. And next week's lesson will be fascinating, I'm sure. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, thank you today for this time of study and this interaction that we've had. Bless each of us as we now go into the more sacred service, the divine worship hour. So bless us, and we come in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, we'll start in about 10 minutes. So go out, get some fresh air, walk around, and we'll come back. At 10:52, we'll start our song service.